So Ibn Khaldun says, singing. So this is the chapter when he talks about crafts and how to make money. Okay, how to acquire wealth, how to get a trade. He talks of various crafts, teaching, for example, trading, for example, farming, husbandry. The very last of those, he talks about music and musicians. So he says the craft, because it is a craft, it is a profession, it is an industry. It is now one of the greatest industries, actually. Is the last of the crafts in any civilization. Is the last thing to develop in a civilization, a dynasty, a kingdom, when everything else has been achieved and done. The last phase, the last craft, the last industry to develop is what? Music industry. So after you've built the roads, the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure, after you've built the schools, the hospitals, the factories, when you've done all of that, you begin to build the cinemas, the stadiums, and the convention halls. That comes last. So this craft, this industry behind it, is the last thing that is developed in civilization. And at a dynastic level, the last thing the dynasty begins to invest in. Because it constitutes the last inch of development. This is excess. You know, if you look at fiqh, for example, الضروريات are the bare essentials. And then you have التحسينيات. These are the things that come like extras. You don't have to have it. It's something nice to have, but it's not daruri. For example, when we say, for example, is it okay for you to take an interest-bearing loan to go to college? Depending on where that lands in that spectrum, is it daruri? Do you have to go to college? Is that the only way to make a living? Are there alternatives to college? If you say that's the only way, it becomes daruri. In other words, I have to do it. It's a necessity. So the ruling changes because now it's a necessity. In the same way, alcohol and pork becomes a necessity. If you're stuck in the desert with nothing to eat, about to die, it becomes daruri. So you can eat because you're in a situation of dire necessity. Tahsiniyat, kamaliyat, these are things that are, it's like embellishment. You don't have to have it. You don't have to take a PhD, for example, in history. You don't have to take a PhD in art. It's nice to have, but it's not an essential. You don't have to go to take a loan, interest bearing, to study, for example, I don't know, color theory. Right? Is it really a necessity? It's a nice to have. So the ruling changes there as well. So in the case of civilizations, the final stage is tahsiniyat. These are things that you develop last because it's the least essential. It's like a topping. It's luxury. So music and entertainments is the last thing now. So that signifies that this dynasty is reaching its final phases. When they begin to invest in that sort of thing, they're reaching that final phase of development. Okay. He then goes on to say that so it's luxury with regard to no occupation in particular. So the issue of music, dancing, singing, concerts, these are not things that develop anything. You're not developing society with this. It's fun. It's entertainment. You're not developing society. You're not developing. You could say, well, actually, the industry is so big. You're creating jobs. People are actually working to build. You're not developing anything with it. It's entertainment. Ibn Khaldun says this, not myself. So he says these are things that come last because they have least value to society. But it is a marker of a declining state. It's a marker of a declining state. America is a declining civilization. We can all agree to that, I'm pretty sure. One of the markers of America being a declining state is Hollywood. If you have been anywhere near mainstream media in the last 10 months, you would agree to the fact that Hollywood is corrupt to the core, full of debaucherous and deviant, wicked human beings. And these are entertainers, musicians, directors, filmographers, actors, dancers. models, photographers, choreographers. It's corrupt to the core. It's wicked. It's an evil industry. Right? But it is one of the biggest industries in America. So that is a civilizational marker that we're getting to a point where that society is heading downwards, according to Ibn Khaldun. If you look at the things that entertain us today, when I say us, I mean generally speaking, the culture. What entertains us? Murder, illicit relationships. It's come to the point where unless you do something really bad and shameless, nobody will be attentive to what you're doing. You have to go out there and chase clout, as the youngsters say, clout chasing. That involves humiliating yourself. That involves doing things that others would not normally do on a normal day. The attention economy is such that people are willing to let go of their morals just to attain a bit of fame and notoriety and a following. Rasul said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this was a statement of prophets before him, in lam tastahi fasna' ma shi'at. If you have no shame, do as you please. In other words, that's a sign of the end, when you have no more shame. Al-ḥayā shu'ban min al-iman. Shame and to be shy is a branch of faith. Once you lose that, everything's gone. So this industry is a clear marker for those who are studying civilizational falls. It's a clear marker. In fact, we also read in the very famous book, The Fall and Decline of Rome, the Roman Empire. Towards the end of their cycle, they would also indulge in these sorts of licentious activities, orgies, drunken orgies, all types of sexual deviance, entertainments galore, luxury. This was a sign this civilization is ripe for destruction. That was what signaled their end. And we find oftentimes it's the same thing. Right? It's not something different. You find this excess. It leads to destruction at the end of it. But he pins it to music and musicians, which is very particular. He could have said anything else. He says, no, music and musicians as an industry, this brings destruction, and it's a sign of the end of that civilizational development stage, because it's the least essential. He then goes to say, if the civilization is in crisis, the first industry to be wiped out is what? Entertainment. If the civilization comes into crisis mode, survival mode, the first thing that goes out the window is entertainment. That's the first thing that's crap, because it has no use in society. It has no utility. So this is a sign that when it's about to get into disintegration, complete collapse, musicians and actors are no longer relevant. We're now thinking about the engineers, the doctors, the soldiers, the lawmakers. These are the people we need to come back to save this society. The musicians, entertainers go out the window, because they never really mattered. It was just a luxury. Very profound. Very profound. And I think it is applicable in 2024 as it was when he wrote it, because he was writing at the time when we're seeing this, he was seeing the decline of the Iberian Muslim empires. And they spent a lot of time building beautiful palaces, wonderful gardens. That's why in Granada, in Cordoba, beautiful gardens. And writing about beautiful maidens, how beautiful they were and how sweet the wine and the music. That was a sign for them it's coming to an end. That was effectively a sign of the end for Al-Andalus. The same thing with the Abbasids. He mentions Al-Abbasid, that they also came to a point where they were importing Persian singers. Persians were very good in music, and so once they began to import foreign entertainers into their land, it was another death knell. Again, I'm not making this up, literally, it's in the Muqaddimah. He says, when the Arabs initially had their own customs, they began to import foreign entertainers to entertain them. And in that time Hollywood was in Persia. So they brought Persian singers, Persian musicians. 𝗔𝗢𝗅 is mentioned by name. 𝗔𝗢𝗅 is very well known in the history of Islam. When he enters Baghdad, everything changes. And he was a great musician, a trendsetter, but he came from Iran. Ibn Khaldun says that was a sign of the end. So they began to import these singers and musicians, and the Arabs at that time, the Abbasids, began to find enjoyment in the foreign entertainers, their music and their entertainment. And that was a sign of a weakening dynasty. We know what happened to them anyway. They were a puppet dynasty. Okay, but these are very powerful statements and insights. We should not dismiss them. It's not inconsequential. Everything has a purpose, and when we see certain things happening, we must pay attention. We must pay attention. Okay, so I believe we're living in those times right now. I really believe we're living in those times right now, and we're seeing Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah in real life. We're seeing it in real life at a rapid pace. So then he goes on to say, those people at the time, the Abbasids, were constantly engaged in entertainment and games. As Allah says in the Quran, as-sa'a, the hour is about to come, وَالنَّاسُ يَلْعَبُونَ, they're playing. So they were so busy with entertainment industries and games and athletes and performers and celebrities and conventions and distractions that when destruction came knocking at the door, they were too busy to answer the call. Dancing equipment, robes and sticks. This is the fashion industry. Poems, these are the lyrics and the lyricists. Melodies, all of this was used to transform the society, and this entertainment became a sign of the decline of the Arabs, the Abbasids he's talking about here. Then luxury and prosperity came to them. If you wanted to have the finest form of luxury, the most expensive chocolate bar for the Generation Z, I'm sending a few signals here, the expensive chocolate brands, the expensive steaks with gold foil on it, the expensive restaurants, the expensive burgers, the expensive cars, the expensive hijabs came to those nations. They began to import and produce this and sell these things. They came to be known for these things. They came to lead splendid and refined lives and to appreciate leisure. This means they were no longer people who were in touch with society the way their fathers were. They were no longer riding horses, venturing into wilderness, doing manly things, womanly things. They are so used to luxury, sedentary life, that they allow others to do it. And he says the singers left the Persians and the Byzantines. What does this mean? Byzantium, the West, and North Africa. The Sassanid or Persian Empire, the East. They had the most developed forms of entertainment at the time. The biggest celebrities were from these parts of the world. But a time came when Baghdad, Abbasid Baghdad, was so well known for its wealth and luxury and excess that those entertainers, those celebrities, those A-listers left Hollywood and Bollywood and came to Baghdad. I'm sure you get the message. They left Hollywood and Bollywood and came to Baghdad. And so he says, those people came into the Hijaz, Allahu Akbar, and became clients. I could cry right now. They came to the Hijaz, which was the old name, and became clients of the Arabs. Wallahi. This describes what we're seeing today. The biggest names in entertainment today, you're not really big until you've been to certain Arab nations. You're not really that big unless you've had a headline concert or a private concert in these Arab nations today. If I am lying, correct me. The biggest of the names, the biggest names in football, in fashion, in music, in entertainment, you are not really that big unless you've been invited to perform or to play in these nations. The new Baghdad of 2024. Ibn Khaldun was spot on. Now, if all of this having been said, the writing is on the wall. The writing is really on the wall. Right? So he says these are all signs of the end. If you see these things happening, mark the days, because it's coming to an end. And he's speaking specifically of the Arabs in the Hijaz and also Iraq at the time, Mesopotamia. Specifically, when he mentions here, they descended upon Hijaz and became clients of the Arabs. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. So knowing this, and I find this deeply fascinating stuff, really deeply fascinating stuff when we see these sorts of things. Yeah. So precise. So now we're going to see where the Umayyad dynasty begins to topple. And this is under Al-Walid ibn Yazid ibn Abdul Malik. So he came to power. He was only 35 years old. He was a youth, because youth in Islam is 40 years and below. He was well within his youth. He was only 35 when he became Khalifa. Ibn Khaldun mentions, aside from the music and entertainment that we already discussed previously, he tells us now of the final stages, the literal end of the dynasty. There are further markers. So he says, among the things that corrupt sedentary culture, there is a disposition towards pleasures and indulgence because of great luxury. That's obvious. Pompeii, for example, Rome, the corruption of these people when they had too much wealth, too much disposable income, too much time. So he says it leads to diversification of the desires of the belly for pleasurable food and drink. So this is when that society or that dynasty or that civilization, they begin to indulge a lot when it comes to food and food consumption. Right? There's a lot of it, a lot of variety. All types of food and drink are available, a lot of variety, a lot of quantity. They indulge, not because they need it to sustain themselves. It's now almost a habit. It's now almost a part of just entertainment, eating for comfort, and all varieties of food. So he says one of those signs is diversification of food. You would go for exotic food that normally wouldn't be accessible to you or in your country. You import those foods. So you have these types of diets that are very rich in terms of variety. And that's a way of diversifying your taste buds. That's one of the markers he mentions. Then he says that is directly followed by diversification of sexual gratification. Islamically speaking, there's a connection between the stomach and the private part. There's a connection between what you eat and how you behave in your sexual life. There's a connection between those two. So he says when the food is diversified, the sexual instinct or the sexual regime changes as well. There's experimentation. So this is followed by diversification of the pleasures of sex through various ways of sexual intercourse, such as adultery and homosexuality. So in the societies where there is the final stage of development, a lot of entertainment, a lot of food and variety, and people eat for comfort, according to Ibn Khaldun, that also follows that they should also have a lot of a high rate of sexual impropriety, of infidelity, of deviant activity and homosexuality. It follows from that pattern. So that's what you should look for next. That's the next step. You need to look for that. A rise in sexual impropriety, abortions, illicit sexual relationships, homosexuality, adultery. This will follow. Then he says this, however, leads to the destruction of humanity. So not just a dynasty, but just civilization as a whole is destroyed by this. Not just that dynasty, the entire civilization comes to an end when people practice this publicly. So it leads to the end of the human species altogether. Forget the dynasty, the entire species. It may come about indirectly or through the confusion concerning one's descent. So what he means by this is, society is not stable when you have a vast amount of illicit relationships and illicit children, because nobody now knows where they are. Who's my father? Who's my mother? Who's my half-brother? That connection is lost. So the social fabric is effectively torn apart. And so because this becomes prevalent, those societies become confused about their lineage. Nobody knows his own son. And this is very graphic. Nobody knows his own son, since he is illegitimate, and since the sperm of different men. This is very graphic stuff. But I did warn you. There is so much sexual deprivation, sexual degradation, and immorality, and promiscuity, that a man won't even know whether or not that woman carrying his child is carrying his child. Because even in her state of pregnancy, she's still being licentious and still being promiscuous. So because of so many different men and their DNA being mixed up in her womb, it's not possible to tell whose son it is, whose child it is. That's the state that the society reaches. And we all know the talk shows and the reactions to whose father it is, whose child is it. There are entire shows, actually, on paternity. Entire shows on paternity. Could you imagine? Has there been a time in the history of mankind when human beings derive entertainment from these predicaments? Bringing a man, or maybe bringing 3 men, 1 woman and a child, and as entertainment, we're going to decide, we're going to uncover who the real father is, as a form of entertainment. Right? As a form of entertainment, it's reached that level. We are entertained by it, and the reactions of finding out he's not the father, he's the father. You know, the acrobatics and the foolishness. That's the level to which we've reached. The American world, especially, they make shows out of this. Okay, so he says that's a result of too much diversification and too much experimentation and too much of these luxuries. You end up there, and society suffers as a result of that. So the natural compassion of a man, this is just such profound, so profound. I mean, subhanallah, the natural compassion a man feels for his children and his feeling of responsibility towards his children is lost. We are talking about fatherless children. A generation in the UK, I think it was in 2019, when I was researching this topic specifically for homeschooling, 49 or 50% of the children born in that decade were born out of wedlock. 49 to 50% of the children born out of wedlock in that decade. So what he's saying here is, when you have too many of these children born out of wedlock, the parental bond that a father has with his children, who he knows are his children, is lost. Because most of these men will not commit to that child and that child's. They're not sure. They don't have the commitment they should have to protect, to preserve, to guide, to love that child. So you have a generation of children who are not guided, who are not loved by a male figure, by their own fathers, who are growing up in homes where the father is absent. The society suffers. If you go to the prisons, the rates of single mother or single parent household is through the roof. They're overly represented in those institutions. The reason being, all of these actions lead towards the society suffering. So these are really profound. So he says that's really what it's going to end looking like. You're going to have a huge society. There is no love between the generations, the father to his son, the son to his father. You're not sure who's yours and who's not yours. There is a lot of betrayal and deviance and homosexuality, which he puts at the very end. So the final step now, if you had a chart from beginning to end, the final step, this is the end of it, is homosexuality. And he says, the destruction of species, again, not just dynasty, but within the dynasty it falls in, but the species as a whole, may come about directly as in the case of homosexuality, which leads to the non-existence of the offspring. So this is the end, effectively. It contributes more to the destruction of the species than adultery, because this leads to, there's no procreation happening anymore. It's a complete end to procreation. So homosexuality is a major sign that this dynasty now, when it promotes and openly celebrates it, is coming to an end. Just close the casket, it's coming to an end. Really powerful things. Really powerful things. So knowing this, let's apply this to Al-Walid. Subhanallah. Al-Walid was known as the Fir'aun of this ummah. I know there is another Fir'aun of this ummah, I know that. But the later historians in their day and age, they called him the Fir'aun of the ummah. He was really licentious, heterodox. He went against orthodoxy. He did things that would normally be considered kufr. But because he was a ruler, it wasn't wise to make takfir of him. He lived a very decadent lifestyle and really outdid everyone when it came to his decadence. Even his own relatives had to stop him. At the end, they had to stop him. His cousins, his brothers, they had to step in. It was too much. So he's the first Umayyad king, Khalifa, whose own family has to go against him and make khuruj of him. So he was really a case to deal with. But the final blow, which is why I've brought up Ibn Khaldun here, he says the final blow to the civilization and that dynasty is homosexuality. The final arrow in Al-Walid's, you could say arrows, was homosexuality. That was where they couldn't take any more from him. That is where Al-Walid signed his own death warrant. That is where the buck stops. We can't take any more Al-Walid. That's where it stops. But not only homosexuality. I mean, does this guy get any worse? Not only homosexuality. If that was the only thing, perhaps. He even went below that. He even went lower than that.
Welcome to HistoryUn, the world's leading online learning platform specializing in Islamic history. To discover the HistoryUn mobile app and participate in regular live and interactive seminars and tune in directly from your handset from anywhere in the world. Enjoy instant access to a growing catalog of on-demand streaming content exclusive to the platform, accessible from a variety of devices including desktops, tablets, and cell phones. Connect instantly with our global community of history enthusiasts via our private community forum. To find out more about our online history programs and resources, visit our website today at www.historyun.com.